Welcome, dear listener. Come on in. Settle into wherever you are tonight. There is nothing left for you to do now. Nothing more to fix. Nothing more to remember. The day is finished. The room is yours. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw soften. Take a slow breath in and a slower breath out. Feel the small sounds in the room around you. The hum of the air, the hush of the bed, the faint shift of cloth as you settle. Let your body grow heavier, just a little, with each breath. There is nothing to hold on to. There is only this quiet space and the long, easy hours ahead. Take one more slow breath in and one slow breath out. Good, you are safe, you are still. You are here. Now, gentle listener, let the room around you fade into something softer, a long shape of land, somewhere out beyond the window, somewhere far back in time. Tonight, we are going to walk slowly through a very old story, not a story of kings or battles, but a story of cousins, the other humans, the ones who walked the earth before us, and beside us, and sometimes a little after us, the ones whose bones now rest in caves we have only just begun to explore. There were more kinds of human in the world than the one you are tonight. Many more. They had names you may have heard, like Neanderthal, and names you may not, like Denisovan, and Naledi, and Floresiensis. They lived in valleys and on islands and in the cold north and in deep tropical forests. They knew firelight and stone and rain. Some of them lived for almost 2 million years. Some of them lived until shockingly recently. Some of them, in a small and strange way, are still alive in you. There is no rush tonight. We are not going to keep score. We are simply going to walk slowly through 8 quiet rooms in the longhouse of our family and look at the cousins who once stood in each one. You may drift off long before we reach the last room. That is perfectly fine. The story will keep without you, just as it has for tens of thousands of years. Settle a little deeper now. Let the lamplight in your mind grow dim. We are about to step into the first room, a green valley in the middle of Europe, named after a man whose surname meant new. We begin in a place that looks at first like nothing in particular, a narrow green valley in western Germany, just east of the Rhine, not far from the city of Düsseldorf. A small river winds along the bottom. Limestone cliffs rise on either side, soft and pale, full of holes and pockets where water has worn the rock for ages. In the 17th century, a young theologian named Joachim Neander used to walk in this valley. He was a hymn writer. He liked the quiet of the cliffs and the sound of the water below. He wrote some of his most famous hymns here, songs that are still sung in churches today, and because he came so often, the valley quietly took on his name. It became the Neander Valley. In German, valley is Tal, so the place was called Neanderthal. There is a small joke buried in this name, and it is worth knowing tonight. Joachim Neander's grandfather had changed the family surname from the plain old German Neumann, which simply means new man, to a fancier Greek Latin form of the same idea, Neander, new man. So when miners blasted a small piece off one of those limestone cliffs in 1856 and pulled out the strange thick skullcap of a creature no one could identify and gave that creature the name of the valley, what they were really doing was naming an extinct cousin the New Man's Valley. Every time ever after that someone has said the word Neanderthal as a joke or an insult, they have been calling another person a new man. It is a small irony, soft as the lamplight you are lying under, and it sits inside the very name. Tonight, gentle listener, we are walking into that valley. The river is small. The air smells of cold stone and damp moss. There is no town, no road, only the cliffs and the cave mouths and the slow life of the late ice age outside. A long shape moves through the trees. It is shorter than you, but heavier. The chest is broad and deep. The legs are short and powerful. The forehead slopes back in a long, low curve, and above the eyes there is a strong shelf of bone. A hand the size of yours, but thicker through the palm, holds a piece of worked flint. The eyes are pale. The hair in some individuals may have been pale or even reddish, the result of a small variant in a gene that we share. Although the variant is not the same as the one that gives modern humans red hair, we will not call this person a Neanderthal yet. There is no one in this valley to do that. We will only watch. We will watch the slow turning of a head. We will watch a small group, 3 or 4 people, settle around a low fire under the lip of a cave. We will watch a child reach toward a piece of meat that has been turned slowly on a stick over coals. We will watch the breath puff in the cold. The other humans, the cousins of our line, were here for a very long time. Their kind appeared somewhere in Europe and Western Asia at least 400,000 years ago, and they walked these cliffs and these forests until about 40,000 years ago. That is a span of time so long that, if you had a single second to stand for every year, it would take you almost 5 days of non-stop ticking to reach the end. They are not new at all. They are far older than us. There is a famous story about Neanderthals that you may have heard. Far from this valley, in the Zagros Mountains of what is now northern Iraq, there is another cave. It is called Shanidar. In the late 1950s and 1960s, an archaeologist named Ralph Salecki excavated several Neanderthal skeletons there. From the soil around one of them, the skeleton known as Shanidar 4, his palynologist found dense clumps of pollen, cornflowers, hollyhocks, yarrow, bachelor's buttons, 8 kinds of flowers, the report said. Salecki proposed that the body had been laid down on a bed of flowers. He wrote that, after thousands of years, here at last was evidence that Neanderthals were no rough beasts, but creatures who mourned, who arranged blooms beside their dead, who felt something like tenderness. The story spread. It became one of the most quoted images in all of archaeology, a Neanderthal funeral with flowers. For decades that was the picture in textbooks, but the story has had to grow up a little. In 2023, a careful reanalysis of the pollen, published in a peer-reviewed journal, suggested that the flower picture was almost certainly wrong. The pollen clumps in the soil look very much like the pollen stores left by burrowing solitary bees. Such bees are common in that part of the world. They dig their nests into soft cave floors and pack them with pollen for their larvae. The clumps appear in patterns that fit insect work, not bouquets, and the species of flowers identified would not, under any modern conditions in that region, all bloom in the same season at the same time. So the most likely explanation, gently and a little sadly, is bees. This does not erase Shanidar. It does not erase the Neanderthals. The same cave still holds the bones of more than 10 Neanderthals, all in roughly the same area, deposited over thousands of years. New excavations from 2018 to 2022 have found further remains right next to Shanidar 4. The cave was clearly a place where Neanderthals returned again and again to leave their dead. Whatever they did or did not do with flowers, they kept choosing this dim limestone room as the place to lay a body down. That is its own quiet kind of meaning. Imagine, listener, the air in that cave, cool even in summer, the smell of stone and dust, a faint draught from somewhere deeper in the rock, the light at the entrance soft and golden. A small group has carried a body inside, careful with its weight. They have placed it on the floor. They sit around it for a while. Outside, beyond the mouth of the cave, the mountains are pale in the late afternoon. There is the call of some bird, far off. There is the sound of a stream. The other thing we know about Neanderthals, the thing that may be the most surprising of all, lies inside you. Most of the people who hear this story tonight, if their ancestors moved out of Africa some tens of thousands of years ago, carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their own genome. It is not spread evenly. Some of the strongest concentrations of Neanderthal sequence are in the genes of the immune system, in genes such as OAS1, STAT2, and several toll-like receptors. These are the genes that tell your white blood cells what shape a virus has, what shape a bacterium has, what shape a parasite has. When small groups of early modern humans walked north out of Africa, they walked into a world full of pathogens that had been hammering Neanderthal bodies for hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthal immune systems already knew those pathogens. Through small acts of meeting, of partnership, of shared shelter, those immune answers passed across into our line. So when you fight off a winter cold tonight, in the warm, small dark of your own room, a small piece of the work is being done by genes that were last fully Neanderthal 40,000 years ago. There is one more thing worth knowing before we leave the valley. Inside the throat of every Neanderthal whose hyoid bone has been recovered, the small horseshoe of bone that holds the base of the tongue, the shape is almost identical to ours. That is not proof of language, but it is proof that the throat could form the kinds of fine, controlled sounds that human speech requires. They could probably talk. We do not know what about. We do not know if their songs were songs, or chants, or laughter, or simply long, quiet conversations between two adults beside a fire. We can only stand here, in this valley named after a hymn writer who was named after the Greek words for new man, and look at the limestone, and listen to a stream that ran here long before the name. There is one more layer to the story of the Neander Valley itself, and it is worth telling tonight, gently, because it is the kind of detail you may want to share tomorrow with someone who likes language. The German word Tal, the modern spelling for valley, was once spelled Tal. The species name, when it was first written down in 1864 by William King at Queen's University Belfast, was set as Homo neanderthalensis, with the older Thal spelling baked into the Latin. In 1901, a German spelling reform changed Thal into Tal across the country. Maps were redrawn. Road signs were repainted. The valley quietly became Neanderthal. But the rules of taxonomy require species names once published to keep their original spelling, so the cousin, the species, is locked forever in the older orthography. Homo neanderthalensis it remains. The valley itself in modern German is Neanderthal. The species in every textbook is Neanderthal with the old silent H. The two spellings have come apart. The species sits in a small letter that the country itself stopped writing more than 100 years ago. The miners, by the way, never knew what they had pulled out of the cliff. Their work was the simple work of quarrying. The cave the Neanderthal bones came from was called Feldhofer, a small grotto high in the cliff face. The bones came up in the rubble. The miners thought at first that the long, thick femurs and the heavy skull cap were the remains of a deformed human, or perhaps a cave bear. They were saved only by chance, set aside in a foreman's office. A local schoolteacher and naturalist named Johann Carla Fuhlrott was shown them. He took them seriously. He brought them to Hermann Schaffhausen, an anatomist at Bonn. Together they were the first to suggest in print that these bones belonged not to a human you and I would call modern, but to something older, something different, an older form of human that had once shared the country with us. They published this idea in 1857. That was 2 years before Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. The first scientific announcement of an extinct human cousin came before the world had a fully worked out theory of evolution to put it into. Fuhlrott was for a long time mocked for his suggestion. Some leading anatomists insisted the bones must be those of a Cossack who had got lost in the Crimean War, a Mongol, a deformed idiot, anything but a different kind of human. The Feldhofer cave itself is gone. The cliff was dynamited away in the late 19th century to expand quarrying, and only in the late 90s did archaeologists find a corner of the original deposit in a heap of dump material at the foot of the slope. They sifted through. They found small pieces of the original bone mixed with quartz pebbles and 20th century rubble. Some of those small fragments turned out, when studied, to come from the same skeleton as the famous Neanderthal-type specimen of 1856. The cliff that named the cousin had been blown away, but the cousin's pieces were waiting in the spoil. Picture the family in the cave again, listener. The fire is small and well banked. The light reaches no further than the lap of the youngest child, who is asleep. The mother runs a thumb along the inside of a bone, scraping off a last flake of marrow. The father is mending a small spear. There is the smell of pine needles burning slowly. There is the soft rasp of stone on stone as one of the older children, a girl of about 10, sharpens the edge of a flint. Outside the wind picks up, and somewhere far off in the dark an owl calls, and then nothing for a long time. The mother sets down the bone, the father sets down the spear. The fire flickers and steadies, flickers and steadies. The sun goes down, the cave mouths grow dark. Somewhere a small fire flickers and a few low voices murmur in a language no one will ever hear again. And so as the first valley settled into evening, the world turned a long way east, far across the steppes, into Siberia, into the cold backbone of the Altai. There was another cave. It was named not after a hymn writer, but after a hermit. Now, listener, walk with me a long way east, across the wide plains of Central Europe, across the rivers of Russia, up into the foothills of the Altai Mountains in southern Siberia, near the border between Russia, Kazakhstan, China, and Mongolia. The air grows colder, the forests grow thinner, the rocks turn pale and harsh, and somewhere in a low cliff of limestone, above a river called the Anui, there is a cave. The local Altai people who have lived in this country for many centuries call it Ayutash. That means bare rock. They call it that because bears have used it. Their ancestors used it. The cave is wide at the mouth, high enough to walk upright in, and the floor curves gently downward into the dark. There is a side chamber on the south and another on the east. The smell inside is dry and slightly mineral. It is the kind of place that any traveler in the Altai would notice from a long way off. In the late 1700s, a man named Dionysi came to live in the cave. He was an old believer, a member of a Russian Orthodox group that broke away from the official church in the 17th century over reforms they could not accept. Old believers often lived as hermits in remote forests. Dionysi built a small cell inside the cave, People in the nearby villages walked out to see him. They came for blessings, for prayers, for advice. He stayed there for years. He died there or near there, and the local Russians began to call the cave by his name. Dionysy in Russian becomes Denis in English. The cave became Denisova Peshera, the cave of Denis. That is the second small joke of tonight. An entire branch of humanity, an entire kind of human is named in the end after one Russian hermit. He never knew, he could not have known. Every time a textbook now says Denisovan, every time a geneticist somewhere maps a haplotype to that lineage, the word carries quietly inside it the name of an 18th century recluse who came to a cave to be alone with God. Listener, picture the cave on a winter day, snow on the entrance steps, a pale grey sky outside, the bear name and the hermit name layered onto the same wall. Inside, the floor is cool and dry. The walls are streaked with soot from many small fires across many millennia. If you crouch down on the floor and let your hand rest on the dust, you are touching one of the most extraordinary places in the long story of humans. Because long before Dionysy came here to pray, and long before the local Altai people called it Bear Rock, there were others in this room. Russian archaeologists began excavating the cave in earnest in the 1970s. The lowest, oldest layers go back almost 300,000 years. The cave has been used by something human-like, on and off, for almost all of that time. In 2008, in a layer dated to about 40 to 50,000 years ago, a Russian team found a tiny piece of finger bone. It was so small you could lose it between two fingertips. It belonged, the bones suggested, to a girl perhaps 13 years old. They sent the finger to a laboratory in Leipzig that had recently begun to extract DNA from old bones. The result, when it came back, was unexpected. The DNA in the finger was not modern human. It was not Neanderthal. It belonged to a third kind of human that had been entirely unknown until that moment. The species was named, with a quiet bow to the cave and to its hermit, Denisovan. This was the first time in scientific history that a kind of human was identified by their genome before their bones. Other Denisovan teeth and bone fragments have since been found, all of them small. A jawbone here, a finger there, a few teeth. To this day, almost everything we know about Denisovan bodies comes from a tiny handful of pieces. We have, however, learned a great deal from the genome. Genomes are patient. Genomes can carry the story of a body even when the body itself is gone. And the most surprising thing the Denisovan genome has told us, gentle listener, lies very high above the earth, on the roof of the world. Tibetans, the people who have lived for many generations on the Tibetan plateau, sometimes at altitudes above 4,000 meters, have a genetic adaptation that lets them carry oxygen efficiently in air much thinner than what most of us breathe. The single most striking piece of that adaptation is found in a gene called EPAS1. EPAS1 governs how the body responds to low oxygen. The Tibetan version of this gene is unusual. When researchers in the 2010s sequenced it carefully and then compared it against ancient genomes, they found something startling. The Tibetan version of EPAS1 is not native to modern humans at all. It matches almost perfectly the version found in the small finger bone from Denisova Cave. The same long stretch of DNA, with the same particular pattern of variants, sits in a Denisovan girl who died 40,000 years ago in Siberia and in living people on a plateau 2,500 kilometers away. The shared stretch is too long and too unusual to be a coincidence. It can only have moved from Denisovan bodies into the ancestors of modern Tibetans through interbreeding. Sometime in some warm, dark room of stone or hide somewhere in Central Asia, a Denisovan and a modern human had a child. That child had children. Some of those children, many generations down the line, walked up onto the high plateau. They could breathe there where most of us cannot. The strongest single piece of high-altitude adaptation in modern humans is borrowed from a vanished cousin. There is more. In 2019, scientists identified a Denisovan jawbone from the Tibetan plateau itself, from a cave called by Sheer Karst Cave near the Tibetan town of Sheerher. The jaw is about 160,000 years old. That means Denisovans were already living at altitude on the Tibetan plateau more than 100,000 years before our species got there. They went up first. They adapted first. They left us the gift of their breathing. Picture, listener, what that meeting might have looked like. Long before any of the people we now think of as Tibetan walked through high passes, Denisovan families wintered in caves below the snow line. They knew which valleys held water. They knew which paths were too steep when the weather closed in. They knew the names of stones, in a language none of us will ever recover. They had been here a long time, and then a few new families wandered up out of the southeast, taller, thinner, with longer legs and finer fingers. They met somewhere along the edge of the snow. They made fire together. They made children together. The children inherited a small set of instructions for how a body should manage thin air. Those instructions are still walking up the slopes of Everest today. We do not know much else about Denisovans. We know there were probably at least 3 distinct Denisovan populations. We know they ranged across an enormous area from the Altai down into Southeast Asia. We know that people in present-day New Guinea and parts of island Southeast Asia carry roughly 4 to 6% Denisovan ancestry, a higher fraction than anyone carries of Neanderthal. We know almost nothing of their tools, their faces, or their voices. They are, of all the cousins, the most mysterious, most known from a single fingertip, most felt today through the lungs of strangers walking high in the mountains. There is a second find from Denisova Cave that is worth telling you about quietly tonight. In 2018, a small piece of long bone, found in a higher layer than the first finger and dated to about 90,000 years ago, was sent for genetic analysis. The result was almost too neat to be true. The bone had belonged to a young girl of about 13. Her mother had been Neanderthal. Her father had been Denisovan. The girl was, in genetic terms, a first-generation hybrid. There was no ambiguity. Each chromosome carried a clean Neanderthal half and a clean Denisovan half, the way a child's chromosomes always do. The 2 species we have spoken about so far, the cousin from the Neander Valley and the cousin from the cave of the Hermit, were not strangers. They met. They had children together. They sometimes raised those children to 13 years of age in Siberian caves where the bones, by accident, are still preserved. We have one of them by name now. Her bone fragment is called Denisova 11. The researchers, on the strength of her parents, sometimes call her Denny. She is the first known direct child of 2 extinct human species, and her existence forced a quiet revision in everyone's picture of the late Ice Age. The world was not, it turns out, a careful sequence of one human species cleanly replacing another. The world was a small set of overlapping populations, in caves and in valleys and around small fires, occasionally crossing in the way that humans tend to cross. Denisova Cave itself records this beautifully. In its long sequence of layers, The cave preserves the DNA fingerprints of 3 separate kinds of human: Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans. They were not always there at the same time. They came and went over hundreds of thousands of years, drawn by the same kind of warmth and shelter. The cave does not care which kind of human is sleeping in it on a particular winter. The cave is patient. It keeps each one. Picture, listener, the inside of Denisova on a slow autumn afternoon roughly 50,000 years ago. The fire near the entrance has been burning for many years, in different centuries, in different hearths. There are layers of ash beneath the floor. A small Denisovan family is at the back of the chamber, where the wall curves around in a way that breaks the wind. They are not very different from a Neanderthal family in body, though there are quiet differences. The teeth are larger, especially the molars. The shoulders are broad, the brow ridge is heavy, the face has the wide flat features that the Shaha jawbone hints at. The eldest woman of the group, perhaps 50 winters old, sits cross-legged with her back to the wall. She is sewing a small piece of leather. The needle she is using is of bone, with a small drilled eye at one end. We know they made bone needles. We have several from Denisova in layers older than any modern human needle in the same region. They were, in short, technologically capable people. They tailored fitted clothing. They survived the Siberian cold the way you would survive it, with sewn warmth. Outside the cave, gentle listener, the rivers run cold and clear. Wolves sometimes come close to the entrance at night, drawn by the smell of cooking. The eldest woman pulls her stitched coat a little higher around her throat. The bone needle moves in and out of the leather with the small steady motion that mothers everywhere have used for as long as we have had clothes. There is one further small artifact from Denisova that has stayed in the literature for years, and it is worth carrying with you. In a layer dated to roughly 50,000 years ago, the cave preserved a small carved bracelet of polished green stone, drilled at one end. The stone is chlorite, sourced from a quarry far from the cave. The drill hole shows precision and patience. The bracelet has been linked, by the dating of its layer, to the Denisovans. Whether it was made by them or traded into the cave is still argued. If it is theirs, it is the oldest known polished stone ornament in the world by a wide margin. If it is not theirs, it suggests a network of contact between Denisovans and other small groups that we are only beginning to imagine. Picture the ornament now, listener, a small smooth band of pale green stone on a strip of leather around a thin Denisovan wrist. The hand the ornament rests on is broad. The wrist beneath it is narrow. The bracelet catches a single point of firelight as the wrist turns. There is no story that goes with the gesture. There is only the small private pleasure of having a thing you like to wear. Outside the cave, the Altai winter darkens. The river below the cliff has frozen at the edges. Snow, fine as dust, slips across the entrance step. Inside, the cool, dark room holds the memory of a hermit, and a girl, and a whole branch of our family known only by name. From the cold mountains of Siberia, our path now turns south, far south, into the warm, wet forests of an Indonesian island, where another kind of human lived and grew quietly small. Listen, dear friend, and let the cold of Siberia fall away from you. The path turns south now, a long way south, across the equator and into the warm green water that lies between Australia and the rest of Asia. There is a chain of islands there, scattered like quiet stones, and one of them is called Flores. It is shaped like a long curving fish. The volcanoes along its spine still smoke softly even now, and the forests on its slopes drip with vines and steam. In the middle of Flores, on the western side, there is a place called Liangbua. The name means cool cave. It is a wide, high-roofed limestone chamber, the kind that swallows sound and gives back only the slow drip of water. Outside, the air smells of damp leaves. Inside, it smells of stone and old earth. In 2003, a team of Indonesian and Australian archaeologists were digging here, layer by patient layer, when one of them brushed away the dust from a small skull. It looked at first glance like the skull of a small child. The teeth, however, were the worn teeth of an adult. The bones nearby were not childlike either. They were heavily built but tiny. The full skeleton, when it was reconstructed, belonged to a person who had stood about 1 meter tall, roughly 3 feet 6 inches, not a child, a grown adult of a kind of human no one had seen before. The discoverers, in the warm exhaustion that comes after a long find, started calling the bones the Hobbit. They knew the word. Their children knew it. The world had been reading Tolkien for almost 70 years by then. The Hobbit had been published in 1937. There was already a generation of grown-ups who had grown up on the picture of small, quiet, curly-haired, large-footed creatures who lived in tunneled hillside homes in a place called the Shire. So the joke was easy. The press picked it up at once when the find was announced in 2004. The species was given the proper Latin name, Homo floresiensis, the human of Flores, but the world has called them hobbits ever since. There is something gentle about that. A made-up English word, designed for a children's story, became the everyday name of a real lost cousin. Tolkien had imagined his hobbits as a quiet, peace-loving folk who liked food and small comforts and did not bother the world. The real hobbits of Flores were a little tougher than that. They had to be. The island they lived on was full of strange things. Picture the forest of Flores 50,000 years ago. The trees are tall and crowded, vines hanging from them in ropes. There is the constant high pulse of insects. The light comes down through layers of green and soft moving columns. A small hobbit moves through the undergrowth, perhaps no taller than your hip. The walk is upright, but a little forward-leaning. The arms swing, the hands carry a small worked stone, the kind we now call a flake tool. The face is small and broad, the brow a low ridge, the eyes a dark brown. There is no fur, there is just skin and a little body hair, and the easy intelligence behind the eyes. Through the trees, something moves that should not exist. A small elephant, no bigger than a large pig, picks its way through the leaves. This is Stegodon florensis insularis, a dwarf relative of the elephants that once roamed Asia. Stegodons came to Flores when the sea was lower. The island took them in and shrank them, generation by generation, the way islands often do, because food is limited and being smaller costs less to maintain. The hobbits hunted juvenile stegodons. We have stone tools at Liangbua found right next to butchered stegodon bones. Whether those small elephants were the main meal of the species or only an occasional one is still argued. They certainly were eaten. There were also rats, not the small house mice you might know from your kitchen. Giant rats. Papagomies, the most common kind, was about the size of a large cat. The Flores rats had grown the way the elephants had shrunk. The island had pushed them in opposite directions until they met, somewhere in the middle, in a shape that suited a forest with no big predators. The bones of these giant rats are so abundant in Liangbua that some archaeologists, only half joking, refer to the place as the Rat Cave. They are everywhere in the layers. They were the small, reliable meal of every kind of forest dweller, hobbit included. There is a small detail here that may stay with you tomorrow. In 2019, researchers studied the size of the rat teeth found in different layers of the cave. Tooth size in island rats tracks the kind of habitat they live in. Bigger rats prefer dense forest. Smaller rats prefer open grassland. By measuring tooth size layer by layer, the team could tell, century by century, whether the cave's surroundings had been forest or savanna. The hobbits, it turned out, lived through both, but they lived more thickly, more abundantly during the forest phases. They preferred the green dim shade. When the climate dried and the forest opened into grasslands, the hobbits became scarcer. They were creatures of the soft, cool understory. The small white teeth of forgotten rats, layered through the cave floor, kept that record for tens of thousands of years until someone thought to read it. There was one more thing about hobbits that stops most people short the first time they hear it. Their brain was very small, roughly 420 cubic centimeters, about the size of a grapefruit, about a third of the size of yours, and yet they made stone tools. They knapped flake blades, they lit fires, they hunted animals larger than themselves. They lived for tens of thousands of years on a difficult island. Brain size by itself is not a clean measure of mind. The hobbits had a small grapefruit's worth of folded grey matter inside their skulls, and they used it well. We do not know exactly how Homo floresiensis arrived on Flores in the first place. The island has never been connected to mainland Asia by dry land. To reach it, somebody somewhere, deep in the past, must have made a sea crossing, either deliberately on a raft of some kind, or accidentally swept by a storm on a piece of floating debris. Stone tools on Flores have been dated to around 1 million years ago, long before Homo floresiensis itself. Whoever the ancestors of the hobbits were, they probably came as very small founder groups, perhaps just a few individuals. The island then took them and squeezed them, generation after generation, into the small forest people we now know. The line of when the hobbits stopped is moving as research goes on. The most reliable bones at Liangbua are now thought to date to about 50,000 years ago. Around that same time, anatomically modern humans, that is, our own species, were spreading through this part of the world on their way to Australia. We do not know whether the two ever met on Flores. We do not know whether they could have spoken to each other. We do not know what stories the hobbits told themselves about the tall, thin newcomers, if any of them ever did. The hobbits, it seems, did not survive their first encounters with our way of being human. There is a small further detail about the cave at Liangbua that may stay with you. The stratigraphy, the layered record of soils and ash and bone preserved in the cave floor, is unusually rich. In some places it goes back more than 100,000 years. The hobbits left signs of themselves through long stretches of that record. They lit hearths. They knapped flake tools by the hundred. They dropped clamshells brought up from the river. They lost the occasional bead. The same cave, in much higher layers, also preserves the early presence of modern humans. From the moment our species arrives in this part of Indonesia, perhaps 50 to 40,000 years ago, the hobbit signal in the cave fades. There is no scene in the sediment of a sudden encounter, There is no last standing place. There is only a pattern repeated all over the world wherever Homo sapiens arrived, an older cousin, present for a long time, very gradually thinning out of the record around the moment when our kind shows up. We do not know whether it was direct competition. We do not know whether it was simple displacement, with our ancestors edging the hobbits out of the best food sources and the best shelters. We do not know whether it was disease, our virus loads from a richer animal world quietly overwhelming an island population that had never met them. It may have been all three. It may have been something else again. The bones of Langbois keep their patient quiet. They hint. They do not declare. There is one more piece of the Flores story worth carrying with you to sleep tonight, listener. There is, on the same island, in a place called Matamenge, a much older site than Langbois. Its layers are dated to around 700,000 years ago. The bones there are tiny, a jaw fragment, a few teeth. They are not Homo floresiensis exactly, but they are clearly small, and they are likely the ancestors of the hobbits we have just met. That means small humans had been on Flores for the better part of 1,000,000 years before they vanished. Whatever the original population was, it had had hundreds of thousands of years on this island to be reshaped. The forest understory, the limestone caves, the dwarf elephants, the giant rats, these had become the only world the hobbit lineage knew. They were Flores. Flores was them, when the world finally changed around them, when our kind walked off the boats from the west. They had nowhere left to retreat to. There was no other island. There was no other forest. The smaller world they had been made for was the only world they had. Picture, listener, one quiet morning in the cave, in the last centuries of the species. The light at the entrance is pale grey. It is the cool hour before the heat begins. A hobbit grandmother sits with her back against the limestone near the hearth. Her hair is grizzled. Her hands rest on her knees. A grandchild plays at her feet with a small smooth pebble, tossing it from hand to hand. There is no rush this morning. Outside, somewhere down the slope, a giant rat moves through the leaves and pauses to listen. Birds call. Water drips from the cave roof. The grandmother closes her eyes, briefly, and then opens them again. She does not yet know that her people are nearly the last. There is a small further fact about the hobbits, listener, that may surprise you. Their hands, when carefully reconstructed, were a strange mosaic. The thumb was relatively small in proportion to the other fingers, in a way that resembles much older species. The wrist bones were old in form too, more like Australopithecus than like ours, and yet the same hand could grip and shape a stone tool with skill. The fingers could pinch a small flake. The arm could swing a small hammer down with control. Hobbit hands were not modern hands. They worked anyway. There is a gentle lesson hidden in that. The capacity to make and use tools, the capacity to live in a complicated world, did not come neatly packaged with a fully modern body. It came piece by piece, in different combinations, in different small populations, on different islands. The hobbits had a piece of the puzzle. So did we. So did everyone we have visited tonight. The forest darkens. The columns of green light fade into evening. A small Stegoden mother and her calf move quietly through the leaves, and somewhere not very far away, 4 small upright shapes follow, walking with the easy patience of creatures that know exactly where each root and each stone lies on this trail, from a small island that took its humans and made them small. The path turns now to a much older cousin, the longest-lived human of all, who walked across continents and made the first marks the world has ever kept. Now, gentle listener, the path turns again and stretches very far back. We are leaving the island and the small forest cousin behind. Settle a little deeper. There is no need to keep up. Tonight we are walking, slowly, into the deepest room in the longhouse. The cousin we are about to meet was here for almost 2 million years. They were the first of us to leave Africa. They are the reason any of the others we have seen tonight existed at all. They are called Homo erectus. The Latin name is plain and direct. Homo means human. Erectus means upright. Upright human. The English word erect, the one we still use to describe a posture, comes from the same root. Every time someone today says of a person that they hold themselves erect, they are using the species name of a cousin who died out about 110,000 years ago. The name is older than the species in a sense, because it is built from a Latin word older than us, and the Latin word is itself older than the language we are speaking now. So the species name is a kind of bridge that walks back across many quiet rooms of language, all the way to a cousin who walked the riverbanks of Java 500,000 years ago. The first bones of this cousin were found in 1891 on the island of Java in what is now Indonesia. A young Dutch military doctor named Eugène Dubois had gone to the East Indies specifically to look for human ancestors. The idea sounded mad to most of his colleagues. He went anyway, along a slow brown river called the Solo, near a small village named Trinil. His diggers turned up a thick skull cap, with a low forehead and a heavy brow, and not far from it a femur that looked human and walked human. He named the find Pithecanthropus erectus, upright ape man. Later, when the comparison settled, Pithecanthropus was folded into our genus, and the name became Homo erectus. The fossils Dubois found were called Java man for many decades after, and you can still see that name in older books. Picture, listener, the slow brown Solo River at dusk. The water is warm. Mosquitoes hum just above the surface. There are crocodiles somewhere out in the muddy current, and they are paying no attention to anyone tonight. On a small bank between two stands of bamboo, a family of Homo erectus is sitting around a low fire. They are taller than the hobbits. They are slimmer. They are very nearly your height. The shoulders are a little broader, the brow a little heavier, the chin a little less developed. Otherwise, in profile, you might not know on first glance that you are not looking at a person from your own street. They are eating clams. They have gathered them earlier in the day from the river shallows. The shells are heaped beside the fire. One of them, a young woman, is sitting cross-legged with a clam shell on her knee. She is holding what looks like a fragment of shark tooth. She presses the point of it against the shell, slowly, and draws it across the smooth surface. A tiny scratch appears. She turns the shell. She draws another scratch, a little further along, almost parallel. She turns it again. The marks make a soft zigzag. She does not look up. There is no audience. The marks are not for anyone. They are simply being made. We know about her, in a sense. In 2007, a graduate student named Stephen Monroe was looking through old photographs of fossil clam shells from Trinil that had been collected more than a century before, and he noticed something on the surface of one of them, a small clear zigzag. The lines were not random. They had been deliberately cut. The shell, when its sediments were carefully redated, turned out to be between 430,000 and 540,000 years old. That makes the zigzag the oldest known human-made geometric mark on Earth. It is older than any cave painting. It is older than any other engraving by a margin of about 300,000 years. It is, in a quiet way, the oldest mark anyone has ever kept. We do not know why the woman drew it. We may never know, but it is there. It is the silent first sentence of a long, long conversation. Homo erectus did not only sit beside the solo, they were the great walkers. Their bones have been found in Africa, where they likely first appeared roughly 2 million years ago, and they have been found as far north as the Caucasus, in modern Georgia, at a site called Dmanisi, dated to about 1.8 million years ago. They have been found across Asia, in China, in Java, in places between. By the time the species disappeared, late in the cousin's story, they had occupied an enormous part of the Old World for an almost unimaginable stretch of time. To put that span in plain numbers, Homo erectus existed for about 1,900,000 years. Our own species, Homo sapiens, has existed for about 200 to 300,000 years. That means erectus lasted, depending on how strictly you count, about 10 times longer than we have so far. It is a humbling figure. It does not promise that we will follow them. It does not promise that we will not. It only says that, by the simple measure of how long a kind of human can stay in the world, they were astonishingly successful, and we are still very young. Picture another quiet evening, this time a much, much older one. Far away in southern Africa, in a wide cave called Wonderwork, in what is today the country of South Africa. The cave's name in Afrikaans means miracle. It is one of those long sloping caves that opens like a yawn into the side of a hill. Inside, in a layer about 1 million years old, the floor preserves something striking. Burned bone, burned plant matter, tiny mineral signatures of fire that was lit there, on that spot, in that cave, 1 million years ago. The carbon and the ash are not the kind that drifts in from outside. They are the kind that comes from a fire built deliberately on the cave floor. As far as we can be sure today, this is the oldest evidence of indoor controlled human fire. Homo erectus, or someone very close to them, lit the fire. The cave kept the residue. 1 million years later, scientists found it. Imagine standing in Wonderwork on that ancient evening. The mouth of the cave opens west toward a wide, dry plain. The air smells of burning grass and aromatic root. A small group has carried a few pieces of meat back from a hunt. The fire is small and well tended. One of them turns the meat with a stick. The light flickers across the broad, low brows around the circle. They eat slowly. They have eaten this way for many generations. They have done so for so long, in fact, that some researchers have suggested fire-shaped erectus bodies in turn. Cooked food is easier to digest than raw food. Less of the body needs to be devoted to grinding and breaking down meat and starch. The teeth get smaller. The gut gets smaller. The energy that is no longer spent on chewing and digesting can be redirected into other organs. There is at least a strong argument that the larger brains of later humans, including ours, were built in part on the simple gift of cooked food. If so, every meal you have eaten today, every meal that has filled your belly and warmed your hands, sits in a chain of small acts that runs back through this cave. Tonight, listener, you may already be drifting. Let the bamboo by the Solar River fade into something further away. Let the stone tip of the shark tooth, scratching the clamshell, fade into a small soft sound like a fingernail on cotton. Let the scent of meat at Wonderwork fade into the warmth of your own body. There is a small further story you should carry with you about Homo erectus, listener, because it lives in a quiet way on the other side of language. The earliest reliable Homo erectus fossils outside Africa come from a place called Dmanisi in the country of Georgia on the southern edge of the Caucasus. The site is a small medieval village built on top of a much older deposit. When archaeologists began digging there in the 1990s, they pulled out of the soil a series of skulls, jaws, and limb bones, all about 1.8 million years old. These are some of the oldest Homo erectus remains anywhere in the world. They show very clearly that the great walk out of Africa happened far earlier than anyone had previously suspected. 5 Dmanisi skulls have been recovered so far. They are different from one another in striking ways. Some have larger brains, some have smaller brains, some have heavy brow ridges, some have lighter ones. One of the skulls had lost almost all of its teeth long before the individual died. The bone of the empty sockets had healed and closed back over. That person, an old man with no working teeth, had been kept alive for years after the loss of his teeth. Someone had been chewing his food for him, or softening it on stones, or feeding him broth out of skull bowls. Someone had carried him through hard winters when he could not have fed himself. The Dmanisi old man, as he is sometimes called, is one of the oldest pieces of direct evidence we have for prolonged care of a sick or aged human by other humans. Compassion of that kind, the kind that costs the group something to maintain, was already part of what we were almost 2 million years ago. There is one more place worth lingering briefly before we leave Erectus. In central Java, on a hill called Siberian near the Solo River, there are layers preserving Homo erectus material going back roughly 1.6 million years. Siberian is now a quiet rural area of small farms and rice fields. Locals collect small fossils from eroded gullies after heavy rain. Children walk the paths to school past hillsides whose stones are older than our species. The site was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1996 because of its richness for human evolution. If you stand in the Siberian fields at dusk, the cicadas pulsing all around, and you bend down to pick up a small piece of weathered stone, there is a small chance that what you are holding is part of the skull of a cousin who lived 1.5 million years ago. That kind of soft accidental contact with the deep past goes on, quietly, in many ordinary places of the world. Picture, listener, the Solo River one last time, the slow brown water, the bamboo, the small woman with her clamshell and her shark-tooth tip, drawing her zigzag, alone with her small private pleasure. You will never know her name. You will never hear her voice. You can know that she sat there one evening, and that she made a mark, and that the mark is still here. Homo erectus, the upright human, is a cousin we cannot fully imagine. They lived 10 times longer than we have. They walked across continents that did not yet have names. They left behind the first geometric mark in the long history of marks. They almost certainly first tamed fire, and then, slowly, over 100,000 years and more, they faded. The last secure bones on a terrace of the same Solo River in Java are about 117,000 years old. The story of Homo erectus does not end in violence or in any grand fall. It only ends in a quiet thinning of the line until the line is gone. From the long, careful walk of the upright human, the path turns now to a stranger cousin, found very recently in a cave so deep that the team that brought up the bones had to be small enough to slip through an opening barely wider than a hand. From the long solo river of Java, the path turns again and travels south, across the equator a second time, into the dry warm hills north of Johannesburg in modern South Africa. Settle in, listener. The room we are entering tonight is one of the strangest in the longhouse of our family, and one of the most contested. Above ground, it does not look like much, a low rocky outcrop, dotted with thorn trees and grasses, sloping up from the dry veld. Goats wander across it in the afternoons. Farm fences run nearby. Locally, the area is part of a network of caves, known to the people of the surrounding country for many centuries. Some of those people speak Sotho, a language of southern Africa. In Sotho, the word for star is Naledi. There is a small cave system in the rocky outcrop that someone at some point called Rising Star. The English phrase is plain enough. A rising star, in everyday English, is something on its way up, a musician at the start of a career, a young athlete people are watching, a field of inquiry that is starting to bear fruit. The cave system kept the ordinary English name. In 2013, 2 amateur cavers slipped into the cave system to map a passage they had not entered before. They climbed and crawled through narrow folds of limestone for hours, until they came at last to a vertical chute almost 12 meters long. At its narrowest, the chute is about 18 centimeters across. That is a little wider than the cover of a hardback book. Through this slot, the cavers dropped one by one on ropes into a small dim chamber far below the surface. In that chamber, on the floor and partly buried in soft sediment, lay bone after bone after bone. They photographed what they could. They climbed back out. They contacted a paleoanthropologist named Lee Berger. Berger faced an unusual problem. The chamber was nearly impossible to reach. The chute was too tight for most adult bodies. The standard procedure, sending a senior research team in to excavate, would not work. Instead, he posted a call-out on Facebook. He needed researchers small enough to slip through 18 centimeters of rock with caving experience and a willingness to work in conditions far from comfortable. 6 women answered. They were named, among themselves and in the press, the underground astronauts. For weeks they descended through the chute, hours at a time to retrieve by hand, with brushes and trays, 1,500 bone fragments belonging to at least 15 individuals. The species they had found was given the Latin name Homo naledi. The Naledi part of that name, the Sotho word for star, came from the cave they had been pulled from. The species, in its plainest translation, is the starman. Listener, hold that for a moment. Every English speaker who has ever called a friend or a child a rising star has, without knowing it, named a small-brained cousin who lived in this country 250,000 years ago. There is a soft, happy accident in that. The phrase is not new in the language we use. The bones are not new in the world. The two only met recently in this corner of South Africa, and now they share a name. Picture, listener, the chamber. The floor is dust and small white fragments. The roof is low and curved. There is no daylight. The walls glitter faintly when a head torch passes across them. The air is still and slightly cool. The cavers move carefully, on their bellies in some places, with one hand resting on the rock to steady their balance. The bones lie in clusters and in lines. There are skulls. There are jaws. There are tiny finger bones the size of a child's. There are robust adult femurs and small juvenile teeth. Everywhere they look, more emerges. Naledi bodies were not like ours, and not like the Neanderthals. They were small. Adults stood about 1.5 meters, slightly taller than a hobbit, but well below the height of most modern humans. The brain was tiny, about 465 to 560 cubic centimeters, roughly grapefruit-sized, about a third of the size of yours. Their hands were curved and powerful, well-shaped for climbing trees. Their feet were almost modern human in their proportions, well-shaped for walking long distances on the ground. The wrist had an old-style swing. The shoulder lay in an old-style position. The body was a careful patchwork of climbing ape and walking person. The most extraordinary thing was the date. For years before the discovery, paleoanthropologists had assumed that any species this small-brained must be very old, maybe 1,000,000 years, maybe more. When the bones were finally dated, in 2017, the answer was something else entirely. The fossils were between 236,000 and 335,000 years old. That overlaps with the very earliest secure dates for Homo sapiens. Homo naledi was not an ancestor, it was a cousin. It walked the same earth, more or less, as the first of our own kind, a small-brained, small-bodied, climbing hand, walking foot cousin, picking through the dry veld of southern Africa, while somewhere a few thousand kilometers north and east, the first members of our own species were beginning to do the same. The story of Homo naledi did not stop with the bones. In 2023, the team led by Lee Berger announced something more provocative. They argued that the dead in the chamber had been deliberately placed. They argued that some of the marks on the cave walls were intentional engravings. If true, this would mean that a creature with a brain the size of a grapefruit had buried its own dead and made symbolic markings, behaviors that we usually associate with cousins many times the brain size. The announcement made headlines. The peer reviews, which followed in November of the same year, were less convinced. A careful study published in the Journal of Human Evolution and a second comment from researchers at University College London and elsewhere concluded that the present evidence is not strong enough to claim deliberate burial or human-made engravings. The marks could be natural. The placements could be the result of cave processes. The case is not closed. It is genuinely open. Tonight, you will not have to decide. The honest position is that Homo naledi may turn out to have buried its dead and may turn out not to have. We know for now that small-brained cousins were alive in southern Africa at the same time as the first true humans. We know that their bones lie deep, far from any easy place. We know that the floor of the Dinaledi chamber has a quietness that is uncommon, even by the standards of caves. Whether the bodies were carried there with intention, or simply slipped down a long chute one at a time over many centuries, is a question that the rock will answer in its own slow way. Picture the chute again. Imagine yourself, very small, breathing slowly, lowered hand over hand on a careful rope into the dim. Your shoulders feel the squeeze of stone on either side. The walls are smooth from the work of water. There is no echo because the space is very small. After a long time, the rope softens at your wrists. Your boots find a flat floor. A head torch beam crosses. Gently, the curves of small bones gathered there, like leaves of a book in a closed library. They do not move. They have been there a long time. There is something worth noting about how the bones of the chamber were arranged, listener, even if we set aside the question of whether the arrangement was intentional. Skeletons of Homo naledi were found in clusters, adults and children together, skulls and limb bones grouped, sometimes, in ways that did not look like simple drift. The Burger team counts at least 15 distinct individuals from the original chamber, and further excavation in adjoining rooms has now brought the total to more than 24. There are very, very few cave sites in the world where so many individuals of a single hominin species have been recovered together. To put that in perspective, all known Neanderthals from Spain to Iraq total only a few hundred individuals across more than 150 years of excavation. Rising Star alone holds enough melody to compare. Whatever the chamber is, it is one of the most concentrated collections of a single ancient human species ever found. There is a second piece of the Rising Star story you should know. The original chamber, called Dynaladi, opened the question. A second chamber, called Lakeside, was discovered in 2017, 100 meters away, also accessible only by tight squeezes through stone. Lakeside held more Nelady bones, including the fairly complete skeleton of a male given the nickname Neo. Neo was not a juvenile. His bones are well preserved enough that the team could measure their proportions and compare them to other known cousins. He confirmed in detail what the original chamber had suggested, that Homo naledi was real, was distinct, was its own creature, and not a small group of unusual modern humans accidentally trapped underground. There are now 2 separate chambers, far apart, full of naledi bones. A third chamber was reported in 2023. The pattern keeps repeating. Picture, listener, what daily life would have looked like for one of these small star-named cousins. They lived in the savanna and woodland of southern Africa, in country much like what is there today, although the climate then was a little wetter. Picture a small group, perhaps 8 or 10 individuals, walking single file along a game trail through tall grass. They are looking mostly for tubers. They are skilled climbers. When a tree presents itself, the younger ones go up after fruit, while the older ones rest in the shade. They probably ate roots, fruits, and small game. They might also have scavenged from carcasses left by larger predators. Their teeth show signs of dust in the food, the kind of grit that comes from eating root vegetables not cleaned of their soil. Their long curved fingers were strong enough that, at the end of a day, they could pull themselves up into the safer high branches before sleeping. The group leader, perhaps an older woman with a small child on her hip, listens to the sound of the savannah at dusk. She knows the call of every bird around her. She knows which sounds say that a leopard has come down to the stream, and which sounds say that the night is going to be quiet. She climbs first, the others follow. Up above, in the branches, in the thinning evening light, the group settles, small forms tucked together, breath slowing, brows still heavy. They sleep. Below them, somewhere, a sister group, in a different patch of woodland, is doing exactly the same thing in a different tree. There is a small further detail about the dating of Homo naledi that should sit beside the rest of what you know about them. The team measured the age of the bones in 3 independent ways. They used uranium-thorium dating on the surrounding rock. They used electron spin resonance dating on the teeth. They used optically stimulated luminescence dating on the sediment that the bones were lying in. All 3 methods, run by separate laboratories, return dates between roughly 236,000 and 335,000 years ago. The convergence was unusually clean. There is no serious doubt that the bones are about 250,000 years old. That date itself reframed the whole story. Before Rising Star, paleoanthropologists had assumed that brains as small as a hobbit's brain or a Naledi's brain belonged firmly in the deep past. They were the kind of brain you had if you lived more than 1,000,000 years ago. Naledi broke that assumption gently and clearly. A small-brained, climbing-handed, walking-footed cousin had survived alongside the earliest members of our own kind. The line between modern and archaic in southern Africa as well as in Southeast Asia was not a clean stripe. It was a soft scribble. Tonight, listener, you may already be drifting. Let the small starman fade into the dim limestone, and the limestone fade into the sound of breath in your own quiet room. From the small starman deep in southern Africa, the path turns now back to Europe and to a forest at the edge of a cold lake where a different kind of cousin had already learned 300,000 years before us how to throw a wooden spear. From the dry hills of South Africa, the path turns north again, and a long way north, into the cool forested center of Europe. We are leaving the long-walking cousin behind. Tonight, in this room of the Longhouse, we are visiting a relative who first taught us, as a family, how to hunt at distance. We are about 300,000 years ago. The country we are walking into now is the soft rolling land of what is today Lower Saxony in northern Germany. Imagine a wide flat marsh edged by pines and birches. A shallow lake lies in the middle of it. Reeds and sedges line the shore. The air smells of cold water and wet bark. A small herd of horses of an extinct kind called Equus mosbahensis has come down to drink. They are large animals, heavier than modern horses. Their coats are thick. The lead mare lifts her head and listens. There is a very small sound somewhere up the slope behind them. Long after this evening, in the early 1990s, a German lignite mine just outside the small town of Schöningen began to expose layers of preserved peat. The mine workers had been digging there for years. Archaeologists had been watching the layers as they came up. The peat at Schöningen is unusual because it preserves wood, not just lumps of charcoal, actual wooden objects, kept whole by waterlogged anaerobic conditions for hundreds of thousands of years. In one rich horizon, dated to about 300,000 years before now, the archaeologists found something almost unimaginable. Wooden spears, whole spears, slim and tapered, made from spruce and pine, some over 2 meters long, carefully shaped, center of gravity carefully placed. In total, 9 spears, 1 shorter lance, and a double-pointed throwing stick were recovered, along with smaller pointed and rounded wood fragments that may have been domestic tools. The find rewrote the early history of human hunting. Until Schöningen, the wooden weapon record had been, basically, a few short shard fragments. Wood does not last. It is the first thing the world forgets. Schöningen kept its wooden weapons. It kept them lying among the bones of the horses they were used to bring down. Around the spears, in the same buried layer, were dozens of butchered horse bones, with cut marks and impact marks of human work. 10 or more horses had been killed in one place, some of them adults. They had been processed for meat. The hunters had stayed long enough to butcher them carefully. There is a single small fact about the spears that is worth holding. The English word javelin enters our language from Old French, javelot, which itself came from a small Latin spear word older still. A javelin is a small thrown spear. The Schöningen spears are, in every meaningful sense, javelins. They have the right weight, they have the right balance, they have the right tapering shape. Modern athletes have thrown experimental replicas of the Schöningen spears, made out of similar wood, by the standards of competitive throwing. The spears fly. They fly between 15 and 20 meters cleanly. Their balance is similar to a modern Olympic javelin, The next time you see a javelin thrower at the Olympics, listener, drawing back the long pole and breaking into a run before letting it go, hold this in mind quietly. They are repeating a movement that was performed by a different cousin at the edge of a German lake 300,000 years before the word javelin had been invented in any language. Picture then the moment, the horses by the lake, the smell of cold water, a small group of hunters, perhaps 4 or 5, lying flat or crouched on the slope behind a screen of pines. They are not Neanderthals, not yet, and not quite us. They are what we now call Homo heidelbergensis. The name comes from a different fossil, a heavy lower jaw found in 1907 near the German town of Mauer, just outside Heidelberg. A workman in a sand quarry pulled it from the gravel and gave it to his foreman. The foreman gave it to a professor. The professor named the species Heidelbergensis, of Heidelberg. As is so often true with our cousins, the name fixes them, by accident, to a single nearby place, when in fact they ranged across an enormous part of the old world. Heidelbergensis is, in our best current picture of the family tree, the most likely common ancestor of both Neanderthals and us. The Mauerjaw and similar finds sit at a moment around 600,000 to 700,000 years ago, when the lineage that would become Neanderthals on one branch and us on another had not yet split. Heidelbergensis is, in a real sense, the great-great-great-grandparent that you and any Neanderthal share. The hunters by the lake are heavy in build. They are tall. Some of them stand a little taller than you. Their faces have the long brow ridge of Neanderthals to come, but the chin is not yet retreated, and the nose is not yet huge in the cold-adapted Neanderthal way. The shoulders are powerful, the hands are wide and steady. They are holding the spears low against the ground, so they will not catch the light. They wait, they wait, they wait. There is a single sharp whistle, perhaps a particular bird call, perhaps a tongue click. The lead hunter stands. The arm goes back. The body uncoils smoothly. The spear flies low through the cold air over the reeds. There is a sound at the far end. The horse drops to one knee. The other hunters are already running, pulling their own spears as they come. By the end of that morning, 3 or 4 horses are down, their breath stilled, their warm flanks beginning to cool. The hunters work fast. They take the meat in long strips. They take the marrow from the heavy long bones. They cache what they cannot carry under cool, wet earth at the edge of the lake. The work takes hours. By the time the light begins to soften, the lake is quiet again. There is one further sight you should know about before we leave Heidelberg's country. It is in southern England, at a place called Boxgrove. There, in a layer dated to about 500,000 years ago, archaeologists found a fossilized rhinoceros shoulder blade. It carries a small puncture wound, a clean hole through the bone, exactly of the shape and size that a wooden spear point would leave. The Boxgrove rhinoceros is the oldest direct evidence we have of an early human striking large game with a thrown weapon. The first known shot in our family's hunting record is 500,000 years old, and it hit a rhino, and it brought it down. Listener, hear me gently. We sometimes tell ourselves that hunting and weapons making and group strategy are very modern things. They are not. They are old. They are far older than us. They were old before our species existed. They were already practiced, polished, and woven into daily life by our shared ancestor. Every wooden tool you use, every careful handle, Every piece of shaped grained material that fits into the human grip is part of a chain that began somewhere in the layers of forest mud 300,000 years before now, on the edge of a lake whose horses are gone. There is a small detail about the Schöningen wood that I would like you to hold for a moment, listener, because it tells you something about how careful these people were. The spears were all made from spruce except for one, which is made from pine. The shaft of each spear was carved from the trunk of a young tree, not a branch. The grain runs straight along the length. The thickest part of the spear is set forward of the middle, the way it is on a modern javelin, so that the weight leads the throw. The tips were sharpened to a long, fine point. The bases were trimmed to a careful taper. None of this is the work of someone who is just starting to think about wooden weapons. This is the work of a tradition. Behind these spears, somewhere in the deep past before them, is a long, quiet history of failed earlier spears, of softer woods that broke too easily, of points that splintered, of throws that fell short. By Schöningen, the craft was settled. The Schöningen hunters, in other words, were not inventing wooden weapons. They had inherited them. The same can be said for fire, for stone tools, for cooked meat, for so many of the small daily techniques we associate with being human. By the time of the Heidelberg cousins, 300,000 years ago, almost everything we now think of as basic human living had been around for, at the very least, hundreds of thousands of years. They were not at the beginning of the long story. They were already deep inside it. Picture a different evening at the same lake. The hunt is over. The work is done. A small fire has been built up against the trunk of a fallen pine, sheltered from the wind. The hunters, perhaps 8 of them, sit around it. There is the smell of roasted meat. There is the sound of fat hissing onto coals. One of them, a younger man, is repairing the tip of a spear that was bent in the day's work. He holds the wood in the embers, very lightly, until it grows pliable. He sets it on a flat stone, and, with the side of a smooth pebble, he gently presses the kink out of it. He tests it. He works it again. A little further around the fire, an older woman is teaching a child of perhaps 7 how to flake a small piece of flint. The child holds the core in one hand and a hammerstone in the other. The older woman steadies the child's wrist. The flake comes away clean. The child smiles briefly, the way children have smiled at small successes for as long as there have been children. There is a faint splash by the lake. A frog. Someone laughs. A piece of meat is pulled from the fire and offered to the youngest. There is one quiet, slightly sad detail at Schöningen worth telling tonight. Among the wood at the site is a single broken piece, identified as the burnt remains of a worked spruce shaft. The wood is charred, but the shaping is still visible. Someone made this spear, and someone, perhaps the same person, perhaps another, sat by a fire some time later and watched it burn. It might have been broken on a hunt. It might have been ruined by warping in damp weather. It might simply have been the wrong size for someone's hand. Whatever the reason, it ended in the hearth, the way countless tools have ended in countless hearths since, and it stayed there long enough for the soft blackened ash to settle into the peat below the fire, and eventually, 300,000 years later, to turn up in the careful trowel of an archaeologist. There is also in one corner of the site the tip of a small wooden tool that may have been a handheld lance, used at very close range against an animal that had already been brought down. The point is short. The shaft is sturdy. The angle is wrong for throwing. It seems to have been a finishing tool used to deliver a final close strike. The picture that emerges from Schöningen, taken whole, is not of a single weapon technology. It is of a small workshop of wooden tools, each fitted to a different moment of the hunt. The thrown spear in the open, the thrust spear at close range, the throwing stick for smaller game, the pointed and rounded woods for the work of butchery. The fire by the lake burns down. The hunters bury what they cannot eat. They sleep close together, their backs to the fire, their faces to the dark trees. Outside, in the long quiet of the marsh, a single owl moves across the cooling air. From the firelit edge of Heidelberg's lake, the path turns again, away into the much smaller and stranger rooms at the back of the longhouse. We are going to visit two cousins so quietly known that, until very recently, they were almost not known at all. From the firelit lake of Schöningen, the path turns again, and we walk now into smaller rooms. Listener, settle a little deeper. The cousins we are about to visit are quieter than the ones before. Some of them are known from a few teeth, a piece of hand bone, the curved shaft of a young femur. Their names are still unsettled in places. Their stories are still being written. There is a small word we should consider for a moment first, because it links several of these cousins together. Isolation. In modern English, isolation is the state of being apart. We use it lightly, as in splendid isolation, or strict isolation, or self-isolation. The word itself comes from Latin, from insula, which means simply island. To be isolated in the original sense is to be put on an island, to be set apart by water from the rest of the world. There is a quiet truth, listener, in the etymology. Islands have made and unmade cousins of ours for millions of years. They take a small founder population, separated from the wider gene pool, and then over many generations they reshape it. Less food, fewer predators, smaller body. The hobbits of Flores, whom we visited earlier tonight, are one example. There are at least two more. Tonight we are going to walk gently through them. Picture, first, a soft, warm jungle in the northern Philippines. The island is called Luzon. The northern part of Luzon is mountainous, with limestone karst rising out of dense green. There is a valley, and in the side of the valley, set high above a river, a wide cave called Callao. The cave is a known archaeological site. People have used it for many thousands of years. Tools have come out of the floor, and the bones of small animals and old hearths. In 2007, a Filipino archaeologist named Armand Mijares was working in the cave with a team. They were sorting through small fragments of animal bone from one of the deeper layers when one of his colleagues, the Australian zoo archaeologist Philip Piper, looked twice at a particular metatarsal, a foot bone. It did not belong to any of the animal species they expected. It looked vaguely human. They published the find as belonging to a small, early modern human in 2010. They kept digging. Over the next several seasons, more pieces appeared. Small finger bones, small hand bones, several teeth from a single individual, a juvenile femur shaft. By the time the team had assembled 13 fossils, the picture was strange enough that they had to take it seriously as something not quite us. The premolar teeth were small overall, but their shapes carried features more similar to Australopithecus, a much older ancestor, than to any modern human. The fingers and toes were shaped for climbing as well as walking. The species was named Homo luzonensis, the human of Luzon. The fossils dated to about 50,000 to 67,000 years ago. That is roughly the same window in which Homo floresiensis was making its last stand on its island, far to the south. There is a quiet symmetry there. Two small, archaic-featured island human species on two different islands, both surviving until a moment when our own kind was sweeping across this part of the world. Both of them, in the end, gone. Listener, picture the inside of Callio Cave on a hot afternoon. Outside, the cicadas pulse, the air shimmers above the rocks. Inside, the air is cooler. There is a small clear pool in the back of the chamber. Sunlight comes in through the wide entrance and falls in a long bright bar across the floor. A small upright figure sits at the edge of the pool. The body is short. The face is small and wide. The hand on the rim of the water has long curving fingers. The eyes lift to the entrance, where the light is too bright to look at directly. We do not know what they thought. We do not know how they spoke. We have only a few small white teeth and a curve of hand bone to remember them by. The point that should stay with you, gentle listener, is that island isolation has now reduced humans at least 3 separate times that we know of. Homo floresiensis on Flores, Homo luzonensis on Luzon, and on the larger Indonesian island of Sulawesi. Stone tools dated to over 100,000 years ago strongly hint that another small-bodied human species lived there too, although bones have not yet been found. 3 islands, 3 small humans, the Latin root for island, the same quiet biology. The walk now turns north, onto the Asian mainland, into the limestone hills of southwestern China. The province is Yunnan. The cave is Maludong, a name that means in local Chinese roughly Red Deer Cave. The cave was used for many millennia. In its later layers, in the 1980s, archaeologists found bones that at first were too unusual to publish confidently. Skull fragments, a thigh bone, a few smaller pieces. The bones came from individuals who looked, when laid out and measured, unlike anyone else then known. Their skulls had long, tall, broad frontal lobes like ours, but in other ways they were oddly archaic. The brow ridge was prominent, the face was flat and broad, with a wide, flat nose. The molars were large. Most strikingly, the thigh bone was very small. Its shaft was narrow, with the outer wall thinner than expected for a fully modern human. The neck of the femur was long. The place of attachment for the principal flexor muscle of the hip faced strongly backwards. These were features last seen, in our family record, in much older species, in Homo habilis, in early Homo erectus. The bones from Maludong date to roughly 14,000 years ago. Listener, hold that for a moment. 14,000 years ago is, in geological terms, the day before yesterday. By that time, the last great mammoths of mainland Eurasia were gone, or nearly so. The pyramids would not be built for another 9,000 years, but agriculture was already dawning in the Fertile Crescent. Cave painters in Lascaux had finished their bulls and horses and gone home thousands of years before. Modern humans were everywhere, and a small group at Maludong, with bones that looked far more archaic than that, was still alive. The team called these people, informally, the Red Deer Cave people. They were named after the fragments of red deer bones found in the same layers which the people had hunted. The proper question of what they were is still open. In 2022, A Chinese-led team finally extracted ancient DNA from one of the Maludong skull fragments. The result was unexpected. Genetically, the individual sequenced is a modern Homo sapiens, with deep links to the East Asian ancestry that contributed to the first Americans. The DNA says modern. The skeleton, in some of its details, says archaic. We do not yet know how to fit those two facts together. Possibly the morphology was misjudged. Possibly the late Pleistocene East Asian population had small pockets of unusually retained traits that would startle us if we saw them today. Possibly the bones at Maludong come from individuals with a complex local ancestry, with traces of an unknown archaic line behind the modern sequenced genome. The case is unsettled. There is in any large family a relative whose photograph nobody quite remembers, a name that does not appear cleanly on any tree, a story whose details have softened with time. The Red Deer Cave people are like that. We are not finished knowing them. They lived more recently than feels reasonable. They left bones that ask more questions than they answer. The cave still holds them. The cousins of the back rooms have been quiet for a long time. The Red Deer Cave people, the hobbits of Flores, the small folk of Luzon, the ghost lineages we have not yet caught. Their stories blur at the edges. We probably do not yet have the bones we need. We probably do not yet have the words. They are a small reminder, dear listener, that the family of humans on this earth was, until very recently, far stranger and far more crowded than the single line we now imagine. There were many of us, there were many shapes, there were many minds. There is one more cousin, listener, that we should at least name before we leave the back rooms, because their name has been moving in and out of the family tree for almost 20 years. They were once called the third hominin. They were once called hominin X. They have, since 2010, been called Denisovan in part, and Denisovan-related cousin in part. The truth is that Denisovan as a category is probably hiding several distinct groups inside it. The genome work suggests that the populations our ancestors interbred with in mainland Asia were genetically distinct from the populations they interbred with in island Southeast Asia. There were probably groups in the high mountains who differed again from those in the warm coastal forests. We do not yet have the bones to fix faces to those names. We have only the long fingerprints in living human DNA, telling us that, where we can read it carefully, the Denisovan world was as varied as the modern human world is now. There is something quietly humbling in that. We sometimes speak as if the family tree of humans is a tidy thing, with a clean number of named branches, but the bones we have so far, the small handful from Denisova Cave, the few from Shiahe, the 24 or so from Rising Star, the 13 from Kalau, the heap from Liangbua, the puzzling Maludong skull, are at best a thin sample of an ancient world that was for many hundreds of thousands of years, full of small groups of different kinds of human living in different places at the same time. The Earth in the late Pleistocene was, in a sense, a quiet shared house. There were many of us. We were not always close. We were not always known to each other, but we were here together in the same long century after century, in a way that the world has not seen since. Picture, gentle listener, the world map of, let us say, 60,000 years ago. The great glaciers are advancing. Sea levels are low. Vast plains lie exposed where now the sea covers them. There are Neanderthals across Western and Central Asia and Europe. There are Denisovans across Central and Eastern Asia. There are Homo floresiensis on Flores. There are Homo luzonensis on Luzon. There are still small populations on Sulawesi we cannot yet name. The Red Deer Cave people, or some immediate ancestor of them, are in southwestern China. There are likely a few other small groups still unaccounted for in the long jungles of Southeast Asia, and they're walking quietly out of Africa in small parties of perhaps 50 individuals each. There are the early modern humans, our own grandparents many thousand times removed, dispersing into all of this older landscape. They are not alone. They are walking into a house that already has people in it. Picture, listener, what one of those small early Homo sapiens parties might have looked like, walking out of North Africa and across the Sinai land bridge into the wider Eurasian world. 15 people, perhaps 20, a few infants in carrying slings, 2 or 3 older adults, the rest somewhere in the middle of life. Their tools are a little different from those of the cousins they will meet. Their faces are a little narrower, their voices are pitched a little differently. They will move slowly by the standards of later expansions, perhaps a few kilometers a year on average across the long generations. They will meet a Neanderthal family at a fire in the Levant. They will meet a Denisovan group at a stream in Central Asia. They will meet, perhaps, the last hobbits at a beach on Flores. They will meet the small folk of Luzon at the edge of a jungle clearing. They will not, in most of these meetings, do anything dramatic. They will sit down. They will share food. Some of them will fall in love. Some of them will fight. Most of them will simply walk on. The combined effect of all those small meetings over 40 or 50,000 years will be the world we now live in. From those quietest of cousins, the path now turns inward. The last room of the longhouse is the strangest room of all. It is the room you are in tonight. It is the room of your own body. We are about to walk through what remains of all those other humans, and we are going to find that they are, in a small way, here. Welcome to the last room of the longhouse, dear listener. Settle as deeply as you would like. There is no need to follow every word now. The story is gentle, and the ending is soft. Tonight, the last cousin we are going to visit is the one closest to you. It is the one breathing in the same bed. We have walked through 7 rooms. The Neander Valley, with its hymn writer and its red-haired people of the cliffs. The cold cave of Denis the Hermit, where a girl's fingertip taught us how Tibetans breathe. The damp green cave on Flores, where small forest people hunted dwarf elephants and giant rats. The long brown river of Java, where a clamshell carries the oldest mark in the world. The dim chamber of Rising Star, where small star-named cousins lay clustered far below the surface. The cold lake at Schoningen, where wooden spears flew across the water before our species existed. The quiet rooms at the back of the house, where late cousins on islands and in southern Chinese caves left teeth and thigh bones we are still trying to read. Each room has a door. Each door has a person on the far side of it. Each person, in the long story, is a relative. And tonight the last and quietest fact is this: they did not all leave. They did not all close their doors and go. A great deal of them, in a quiet form, came inside the house, came inside you. Listener, lay your attention very gently on your own body, on the breath as it moves in, on the breath as it moves out, on the small warmth of your hands where they rest. The body you are in tonight is not a single line back to a single ancestor. It is a small braid. Most of the threads are Homo sapiens, but not all of them. If your ancestors moved out of Africa some tens of thousands of years ago, Somewhere between roughly 1 and 4% of your genome is Neanderthal. That is on average. It varies a little. Some non-African individuals carry a touch more, some a little less. The pieces are scattered like leaves all across the chromosomes. No single living person carries the whole Neanderthal genome. But, taken together, all of the living non-Africans alive today carry roughly half of the entire Neanderthal genome between them. That single fact is worth saying twice. Roughly half of an entire lost species can be reconstructed today, fragment by fragment, by collecting pieces from people who are walking around. The world's living non-Africans are, in a real sense, a slow distributed museum. Every cell is a small page, every population is a small wing. Together the species library is half full. There is more. If your ancestry passes through New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, the Philippines, parts of island Southeast Asia, or the indigenous peoples of Australia, you carry an additional 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA on top of any Neanderthal. The Denisovan layer is much older and shows up unevenly across the world. It is densest in the islands of the southwestern Pacific. The Tibetan Plateau, as we said earlier in the night, sits inside that pattern. There were not one, but at least 3 separate Denisovan populations that interbred with the ancestors of modern humans. The picture is not a single love story between 2 species. It is many soft repeated touches, again and again, in different places, over thousands of years. The cousins in your genome are not from one cave. They are from many. The ways their genes work in you are sometimes obvious. Several of the keratin genes that give shape to hair and to skin came from Neanderthals. A particular Neanderthal-derived variant of the BNC2 gene contributes to lighter skin in some Europeans. The high-altitude EPIS1 gene of Tibetans, as we know, is Denisovan. Many of the immune genes that you use without thinking when a virus enters your nose tonight, or a small cut on your finger needs to close, carry old archaic versions that came in long ago. They are quietly at work. They have been quietly at work for tens of thousands of years. In a small way, every person who has lived through a winter cold was helped by a Neanderthal who had already lived through 1,000 winter colds. There is one detail that may stay with you. The youngest secure Neanderthal remains we have anywhere in the world are roughly 40,000 years old in a few caves in Western Europe. That is when our family loses its last cousin, in the bones at least. But the bones are not the whole story. Recent ancient DNA work, including work published in 2024 on the human remains from Rennes in Germany and Zlatý Kun in the modern Czech Republic, has shown that the most recent moments of interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens happened around 47,000 years ago. That is, the door between the 2 kinds of humans stayed open for a small period right at the very end. They did not close themselves off and disappear in silence. They were still meeting us, still mixing with us, still passing on small pieces of themselves, until almost the last day of their existence. Picture, listener, a single ordinary morning around 47,000 years ago. A small group of newcomers, our own ancestors, perhaps 15 or 20 individuals, has come over a low ridge. The country is forested. There is a slight smell of pine smoke. Down in the next valley, by a stream, an older group is already there. The older group is shorter, broader. The new group is taller, thinner. The 2 parties watch each other for a long time. Neither makes a sudden move. A child in the new group steps forward. A child in the old group steps forward. The 2 children meet by the stream and look at each other. Their fingers touch the same cold water. They both, at that exact moment, see their reflection together for 1 second in the surface. And in that small second, in that small touch, in that quiet meeting of two reflections, our own species and our last close cousin become braided into one. The work of that braid is in your blood and in your skin and in your immune cells tonight. There is something gentle about that. The other humans, the ones who walked the same earth as us, did not vanish. They could not vanish. They were ours, and we were theirs. They are half stored in millions of living bodies, in patches you cannot see and would not feel. They are quiet inside you while you breathe, and quiet inside the people in the next room, and quiet inside the strangers passing on the street tomorrow morning. They were never really lost. They were only renamed. There is one more passage to walk through, listener, before we let the night close. It has to do with how the cousins are spread inside us. The Neanderthal pieces of you, if you have any, are not random. Over the last decade, geneticists working with thousands of human genomes have been able to map where in our DNA the Neanderthal fragments tend to land and where they tend not to. There are large stretches of the human genome where Neanderthal DNA seems to be quietly missing. In those stretches, almost no living person carries any Neanderthal sequence. These regions are sometimes called Neanderthal deserts. The most striking of them lie along parts of the X chromosome and along regions linked to fertility and to brain function. The most likely explanation is that our two species were just barely interfertile. Hybrid children were born, some of them survived, but certain combinations of Neanderthal and Homo sapiens DNA may have lowered the chances that a child would have its own children, especially if those children were male. Over many generations, those combinations were quietly weeded out. The Neanderthal fragments that have survived in us, then, are the fragments that did the least harm, and sometimes the fragments that did some quiet good. They are concentrated in immune system genes, in skin and hair genes, in metabolism. There are small Neanderthal versions of you that warm your hands tonight. There are small Neanderthal versions of you that hold your skin together. There are small Neanderthal versions of you that recognize a virus before your conscious self does. There is a similar story to tell about the Denisovan fragments, although the maps are sparser because we have fewer Denisovan reference genomes. The Tibetan EPOS 1 story, which we walked through earlier in the evening, is the brightest example of a Denisovan piece that has been actively useful. There are likely many more like it that we have not yet identified. Modern genomics is still a young craft. The ancient pieces inside us are only beginning to be read. Listener, hold the body that you are in right now for a moment. The lungs filling, the heart slow and steady, the hands warm against the blanket. Inside that body, on every chromosome, there are short stretches of code that came from Neanderthals, slightly different short stretches that came perhaps from Denisovans. There is the long modern Homo sapiens code that runs through everything else. Together those threads make the body that is breathing in this room tonight. None of those threads is more or less you than the others. The body does not care which extinct cousin a particular helpful gene came from. The body just uses the gene. The cousin is in the small biology of your skin and your blood and your immune cells, no longer extinct in any meaningful sense. There is a small further point that may stay with you, listener. The picture I have just drawn, with Neanderthal and Denisovan pieces inside us, applies clearly to people whose ancestors moved out of Africa some tens of thousands of years ago. People whose ancestors stayed in Africa, on the long human continent, carry very little Neanderthal or Denisovan ancestry. But that is not the end of the story. Recent work on African populations has shown that there were also archaic groups within Africa whose presence we are still learning to read. Small fragments of DNA in modern West Africans seem to come from an as yet unidentified African archaic lineage that interbred with our ancestors there. We do not have a name for those African cousins. We do not have their bones. We have only the soft fingerprint of their genome, scattered through people now alive on the continent. The pattern of small extinct cousins quietly contributing to modern humans is, it turns out, planet-wide. There is no group of living people who do not in some way carry traces of older relatives. The braid is everywhere. There is a soft thought to carry into sleep tonight. The other humans were not in the end replaced. They were absorbed. The line was not cut. The line was braided. And every body breathing tonight in any country in the world is the result of that long, careful braiding. We are them. They are us. There is no painful boundary between the family of cousins and the family that lives in the present. There is only a single long, quiet continuity made out of small acts of meeting in caves and at fires and along streams hundreds of generations ago that ran forward into the small cells of the body you have right now. And so, dear listener, the long story is almost finished. We have walked the 8 rooms together. We have seen Joachim Neander's valley. We have seen Denise's cold cave. We have seen the rat cave on Flores, and the clamshell on the Solo, and the chamber under Rising Star, and the lakeside spears at Schoningen, and the dim backroom cousins of Luzon and Yunnan. We have stood finally in the room of our own body. The cousins of every room are quiet. The fires are low. The air is settled. There is nothing more tonight that needs to be remembered. Let the shapes of the rooms begin to soften, listener. Let the cliffs and the caves and the spears and the small white teeth and the bright island forests fade gently into one slow pale field of memory. The names can stop. The figures can stop. The story can stop. There is only this last simple fact. They did not leave. They only became part of you. And so as the longhouse settles into the long night, the path turns one final time into the soft small room of your own bed. And so the longhouse grows quiet around you, dear listener. The cousins of the 8 rooms have settled. The valleys, the caves, the islands, the lakes, the dim back chambers, they have all faded into one soft layer of memory. The Neanderthals have laid down their tools. The Denisovans have closed the snowy doors of the Altai. The hobbits of Flores have slipped quietly into their forest. Homo erectus has banked the long fire of wonderwork. The starman of Rising Star is back among the stones. The Heidelberg hunters by the lake have gone to sleep beside their dying coals. The late cousins on Luzon and in Yunnan have folded their hands. There is no story left tonight that needs to be finished. There is no fact left that needs to be remembered. The names you have heard will keep on their own, tucked into the soft shelves of your mind, and they will stay there whether you keep them or not. Let yourself loosen a little further. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow. Notice gently that the room around you has been holding you the whole time. The bed beneath you, the blanket, the soft hush of the air. There is nothing here that asks you for anything. There is only the long, warm dark, and the quiet weight of your own body, and the slow, steady inward turn of a long-told story coming home. Picture, if you like, the lamps in each of the rooms going out, one by one, slowly. The lamp in Joachim Neander's valley dims and goes still. The lamp in the cave of the hermit dims and goes still. The small fire on floors burns lower. The clay lamp by the solar river softens and falls dark. The head torches in the deep South African chamber blink off, one by one. The fire by the lake at Schoningen sinks into its bed of ash. The light in Callio Cave has not been lit for thousands of years already. The thin glow over the Maludong skull in the back room of southwestern China gives way to soft dark. The lamp in your own room is finally the last one still warm. The cousins are at rest. The names are loosening. There is no one left to remember. There is no one left to forget. Their bones are already where they will lie tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and 1,000 mornings beyond. They are still part of you, of course, and they always will be. But the work of holding them up tonight is done. You can let them down. They will be fine. They have been fine for a very long time. Let your own breath grow slower. Let even that lamp soften now. Let the edge of the world go gentle. Let the shapes of the cousins blur together into one soft, long shape, like a single old painting seen by very tired eyes. They did not leave you. They are not far. They are quietly here, in the small instructions for how a body breathes, how an immune system answers, how a hand holds. There is no part of the night, dear listener, that you must do alone. The breath is doing itself. The body is doing itself. The room is holding you. The story is holding you. There is nothing left for you to manage. Now let the lamp go out. Close your eyes. Slow your breath. Let the long house fade. Let the names go. Let the cousins rest. There is nothing more to hold. There is only this. Sleep well. Sweet dreams. Good night.